The night glittered with golden lights, a stage set for wealth, power, and polished lies. Guests in shimmering gowns and sharp tuxedos filled the Collins mansion, raising their glasses high for the birthday of billionaire Richard Collins. On the surface, it looked like a celebration of love and success. But for Victoria Collins, Richard's wife of 10 years, it was the night her world began to crumble. Victoria had dressed carefully, her long silver gown hugging her frame, hiding the tiny secret only she knew. 3 months into a miracle pregnancy after a decade of waiting. She had spent years enduring whispers of being barren, carrying the weight of infertility alone. Richard had grown distant, cold, spending late nights at the office. He didn't know the truth yet. Victoria had planned to tell him tonight, his birthday, in front of the people who once pitied her. She imagined his face when she handed him the small velvet box containing a handwritten note and the sonogram picture. Her heart swelled with hope. But as the doors to the grand hall opened, Victoria's hope cracked. Richard entered not at her side, but with his arm proudly linked with Selina Gray, his young secretary. Selina wore a crimson dress that shimmered like fire, her smile daring anyone to question her presence. Gasps spread across the room. Cameras flashed. Whispers sharpened. Victoria stood frozen, the velvet box clutched tight in her hand. Helen, her closest friend, touched her shoulder and whispered, "Stay strong." But inside, Victoria's chest tightened, her throat burned with humiliation. For 10 years she had stood by Richard, supporting him through every business war, every scandal. And tonight, on his birthday, he chose to crown another woman. Richard gave a toast, oblivious to the storm brewing in his wife's heart. He thanked the guests, praised his team, and let Selina hover by his side like a queen. The words cut deeper than knives. Victoria's fingers brushed the velvet box in her clutch. She thought of the tiny life growing inside her. The one Richard didn't know about. Daniel Harris, an old friend of Victoria's and a sharp-eyed lawyer, watched from a corner. He noticed the stiffness in Victoria's shoulders, the hollow in her smile. He also noticed the way Selina leaned close to Richard, whispering as if she already owned him. The music swelled, chandeliers glittered, and the betrayal became impossible to ignore. Some guests looked away out of shame, others stared with cruel fascination. For the first time in 10 years of marriage, Victoria felt invisible to her own husband. Her hand trembled as she held the velvet box. Tonight was supposed to be about joy, about giving Richard the gift of fatherhood. Instead, she was left clutching a secret while her husband flaunted betrayal before the world. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to let them fall in public. As she slipped quietly toward the balcony, Selina's eyes followed her. A slow, cold smile crept across Selina's lips, because she already had a plan to erase Victoria forever. And in just a few hours, blood would stain the Collins estate. The laughter and music from the gala echoed faintly through the marble halls as Victoria slipped into the private waiting lounge above the ballroom. Away from the glitter and the cameras, she pressed her palm against her stomach, feeling the tiny flutter that only she knew existed. For 10 years she had prayed for this miracle. For 10 years she had endured silence, needles, treatments, and tears. Now, at last, she carried Richard's child, a child he had longed for, but had given up believing would ever come. She sat down slowly, her silver gown brushing against the velvet couch. Her clutch rested on her lap, inside it the velvet box she had prepared for tonight. Inside the box was a folded letter written in her delicate handwriting. "Happy birthday, Richard. After 10 years, we finally have the gift we've been waiting for. You're going to be a father." Tucked beneath the letter was the black and white sonogram picture of their baby. Victoria had imagined the moment countless times. She would hand him the box during his birthday toast, he would open it before everyone, and the room would explode in joy. People who once whispered about her failures would instead applaud her strength. But that dream had shattered the moment Richard walked into the gala with Selina clinging to his arm. The humiliation still burned. Victoria bit her lip hard to stop herself from crying. She couldn't break down now. Not tonight. Her best friend Helen slipped quietly into the lounge. "Victoria, are you okay?" she asked gently, kneeling beside her. Victoria shook her head, forcing a smile. "I'll be fine, I just need a moment." Helen glanced at the clutch in Victoria's lap, her eyes softening with understanding. You were going to tell him tonight, weren't you? Victoria's throat tightened. She whispered, "Yes, I thought this would be the happiest night of his life." Helen's hand covered hers. "It still can be. You just need to choose the right time. Don't let that woman steal this from you." The words gave Victoria a small spark of courage. She wiped her eyes and inhaled deeply. She wanted Richard to know. She wanted the man she had loved for 10 years to look at her, not through her. But doubts gnawed at her heart. What if he had already chosen Selina? What if this child came too late? She pressed her hand against her stomach again, whispering softly to the life inside her, "You are my hope. You are the reason I will not give up." Downstairs, applause erupted as Richard raised his glass for another toast. Selina stood close, smiling smugly, acting like she already belonged. Victoria stood, her resolve wavering but unbroken. She clutched the velvet box tighter, determined to walk back into the gala and remind Richard who she was, not just his wife, but the mother of his unborn child. What she didn't know was that Selina had already planned to make sure Victoria never got the chance to reveal her secret. The gala roared on below, but Victoria steadied herself, clutching the velvet box in her hand. She whispered silently to her unborn child, promising she would not let humiliation break her. With determination, she stepped back toward the glittering hall, ready to reveal the truth to Richard. That was when Selina appeared at the doorway. The mistress stood there, smiling sweetly, her crimson dress glowing like fire against the marble walls. Her eyes scanned Victoria's clutch, and a glimmer of suspicion passed before she quickly masked it with charm. "There you are," Selina purred softly, her voice dripping with feigned concern. "Everyone has been looking for you. I was worried you might not be feeling well." Victoria stiffened. The very sight of Selina made her blood boil, but she forced a polite expression. "I just needed some air," she answered. Selina tilted her head, studying her like a predator studying prey. "Why don't we step outside together? The balcony has the most beautiful view tonight. It'll calm your nerves." Victoria hesitated. Something in her gut told her this was wrong. Yet Selina's tone was almost disarming, too gentle to spark open conflict in front of the guests. She didn't want to cause a scene. Not tonight. Not when she still held the most important secret of her life. Helen's voice echoed faintly in her memory. "Don't let that woman steal this from you." Taking a steady breath, Victoria nodded reluctantly. "All right, just for a moment." Selina's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She extended her hand, guiding Victoria down the dimly lit corridor that led away from the ballroom. The sound of laughter and music faded, replaced by the hollow echo of their footsteps on the marble floor. As they walked, Selina began her performance. "You know, Victoria, I've always admired you. You've been such a strong wife, standing by Richard all these years. But people change. Love changes. Sometimes it's better to let go." Victoria's heart tightened, but she remained calm. "I am his wife, Selina, and whether you like it or not, Richard made vows to me." Selina's eyes glittered with malice hidden behind her smile. "Yes, but vows don't stop loneliness, do they? He's happier with me. Can't you see that? Why torture yourself by holding on to a man who doesn't want you anymore?" Victoria's grip tightened around the velvet box. She wanted to scream, to throw the truth in Selina's face, that she carried Richard's child, the one thing Selina could never give him. But she bit her tongue. The moment had to be Richard's, not Selina's. They reached the balcony doors, the night wind sweeping in as Selina opened them. Beyond lay the quiet terrace overlooking the dark cliffside gardens. Selina's voice softened, almost tender. "Come, let's take in the air together. I only want peace between us." Victoria stepped forward cautiously, her instincts warning her, her pulse quickening. Behind her, Selina's eyes hardened, her sweet mask slipping for just a second. She wasn't leading Victoria to peace. She was leading her to destruction. And within minutes, the balcony would become the stage for a deadly betrayal. The cold night air whipped across the terrace, carrying the scent of roses from the cliffside garden below. Victoria stepped onto the balcony, clutching the velvet box close to her chest. She glanced up at the moonlight, steadying her breath, reminding herself of the tiny heartbeat within her. Tonight, she told herself, she would fight for her family, no matter what. Selina followed her, her heels clicking softly against the stone floor. She leaned casually against the railing, her smile sweet but her eyes sharp as daggers. "Isn't it beautiful out here?" she asked, gesturing toward the cliff. "So quiet, so peaceful, unlike the noise inside." Victoria nodded faintly, though unease rippled through her. The terrace was isolated, the ballroom sounds muted now to a distant hum. She turned to leave, but Selina blocked her path with a graceful step. "Victoria," Selina began softly, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "Why hold on to a man who doesn't love you anymore? Don't you see? You're only torturing yourself." Victoria's eyes narrowed. She clutched the velvet box tighter. "Richard is my husband. You may think you've stolen him, but you'll never replace me. You'll never take away what I carry inside me." For a flicker of a moment, Selina's composure cracked. Her eyes darted to Victoria's stomach, realization flashing in them. You're pregnant?" she whispered. Victoria's lips curved in the faintest, defiant smile. "Yes, and tomorrow Richard will know." Rage exploded behind Selina's painted smile. Panic twisted with jealousy in her chest. She could not allow this child to exist, not when it meant losing everything she had schemed for. With a sudden shift, Selina stepped closer, pretending to steady Victoria's arm as if in kindness, but her grip turned cold, forceful. "Richard doesn't need you anymore," Selina hissed under her breath, "and he never will." Before Victoria could react, Selina shoved. The world tilted, the sky spun. Victoria's scream tore through the night as her body crashed against the stone edge and tumbled into the darkness below. The sound of her body hitting the rocks was drowned by the music from inside, but Selina screamed dramatically, clutching the railing. "Help! She fell! Somebody help!" Guests rushed out, gasping as they saw Victoria's silver gown sprawled on the jagged rocks below. Blood seeped across the stone, glistening red under the moonlight. Richard shoved past everyone, his face ashen. "Victoria!" he shouted, his voice breaking. He sprinted down the steps, his heart pounding in terror. When he reached her, he collapsed beside her body, gathering her into his arms. Her face was pale, her lips stained with blood. No, please, stay with me," Richard begged, tears streaming down his face. But her eyes fluttered shut, her body limp in his arms. To him, she looked gone. Selina appeared above, crocodile tears streaming as she whispered to the crowd, "It was an accident. She slipped. I tried to save her." And in that moment, Richard believed the greatest lie of his life, that his pregnant wife was dead. But what no one knew was that fate had already chosen a different ending. Victoria's story was far from over. Richard's cries echoed into the night as he held Victoria's limp body against his chest. Guests surrounded him, their horrified whispers mixing with the sound of sirens approaching in the distance. Blood soaked through his tailored suit, spreading warmth that felt like fire against his skin. But while Richard grieved, fate was quietly weaving a different path. As paramedics fought to reach the mansion through traffic, a small group of locals from the nearby coastal road had already seen the fall. Among them was Mary Thompson, a widow in her late 60s, with kind eyes hardened by years of loss. She rushed forward before the guards could block her. "She's still breathing," Mary shouted urgently, kneeling beside Victoria. Her hand pressed against Victoria's pulse. It was faint, but it was there. "We don't have time to wait for the city ambulance. We need to move her now." The guards hesitated, but Mary and two fishermen from the coastal village lifted Victoria carefully. Selina stood at the balcony above, her hands clutched to her chest in fake horror, but her eyes narrowed in anger as she realized the wife she had tried to erase was still alive. "Sir, please," one of the guards urged Richard. "Let the medics handle this." Richard, consumed with grief and shock, barely heard them. He rocked Victoria's body, whispering broken apologies. His vision blurred with tears, and in his mind she was already gone. Mary's group didn't wait for permission. They carried Victoria down the back path toward a truck parked near the road. "There's a small clinic by the coast," Mary said firmly. "If we can get her there, maybe she has a chance." By the time the official ambulance arrived at the mansion, Victoria was already gone, spirited away in the back of that old truck, hidden from the eyes of those who believed she had died. Hours later, inside the dimly lit coastal clinic, doctors worked frantically. Victoria's head injury was severe, her body battered, but the child inside her still fought to survive. Dr. Patel, the clinic's chief physician, made the call. "We're not losing her, not tonight. Mary stayed by Victoria's side through the long night. When dawn broke, Victoria opened her eyes briefly. Confused, her voice a faint whisper. "Where am I?" "You're safe, sweetheart," Mary soothed, brushing her hair back. But when Victoria asked about Richard, about the mansion, her words broke off into fragments. The head trauma had taken her memory, wiping away the life she once knew. Dr. Patel warned gently, "Her recovery will take time. She may never remember everything." Mary looked at the frail young woman lying before her and made a quiet vow. "Then I'll protect her until she's ready." Back in the city, Richard signed the death certificate with trembling hands. To him, Victoria was gone forever. Selina rested her hand on his arm, pretending to console him, while secretly savoring her victory. But miles away, in a humble village by the sea, Victoria Collins still breathed, unaware that her child would soon be her only anchor to life, and the world would never be the same once she remembered who she truly was. The morning after the tragedy, the Collins mansion was draped in silence. Black ribbons were tied across the iron gates, and the press swarmed outside, demanding answers about the billionaire's wife who had fallen to her death. Inside, Richard sat in his study, staring at the death certificate on his desk. His name, his signature, the final seal, it all declared that Victoria Collins was gone. He couldn't breathe as he looked at it. The ink was dry, yet his heart screamed that it was wrong. Still, the evidence, the blood, the fall, her lifeless body in his arms, left him with no choice but to believe. His hands shook as he poured a drink, the glass trembling before he downed it in one swallow. Selina entered the study quietly, dressed in black as though she were the grieving widow. Her heels clicked on the polished wood floor. She carried herself like a queen now, her presence bold and unashamed. "Richard," she whispered, placing her hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to face this alone. I'm here for you. Always." Richard closed his eyes, grief and exhaustion weighing on him. For a moment, he leaned into her touch, desperate for comfort, desperate for something to numb the pain. Selina's lips curved into a victorious smile he could not see. While Richard drowned in sorrow miles away, life stirred in a small coastal clinic. Victoria lay in a simple bed, the sound of waves drifting through the cracked window. Her forehead was bandaged, her body weak, but her chest rose and fell steadily. Mary sat beside her, knitting quietly, glancing up every few minutes to check on her patient. When Victoria stirred, her eyes fluttering open, Mary reached for her hand. "You're safe now, sweetheart. You had a terrible fall, but you're going to be all right." Victoria frowned, her gaze distant. "Fall," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. Her memory fractured. I don't remember." Mary's heart ached. She had seen this before, trauma stealing away memory like a thief in the night. "Don't force it," she soothed. "You just rest. In time, what's meant to come back will return." Victoria touched her stomach instinctively. A faint kick answered her, and her eyes widened with sudden clarity. "The baby? Is the baby safe?" Dr. Patel entered just then, his tone calm but firm. "Yes, your child is still with you. Strong heartbeat. You are both fighters." Tears welled in Victoria's eyes. She didn't know her name, didn't know where she came from, but she knew she carried life inside her, and that was reason enough to keep going. Back in New York, Richard stood before a crowd of reporters, his face hollow. "Victoria Collins was the love of my life," he declared, his voice breaking. "Her loss is something I will never recover from." Cameras flashed, questions were shouted, but Selina stepped in gracefully, that smile, shielding him, playing the perfect partner. And so the world mourned a woman who was still alive. But hidden by the sea, a forgotten wife carried the child who would one day change everything. The sea air was salty and fresh, carrying the cries of gulls over the small coastal village. For weeks after her fall, Victoria remained under Mary's care, at the modest clinic. Her memory was still broken, her mind foggy, but her body slowly healed. Every day, she touched her stomach, grounding herself in the one truth she could not forget: she was carrying a child. Mary became her guardian, watching over her like a daughter she had never had. "You don't need to remember everything right now," Mary told her gently as they walked the sandy shore one morning. "Sometimes life gives us a chance to start over. Maybe that's what this is for you." Victoria looked out at the horizon, her eyes uncertain. But who was I before this? Was I happy? Did someone love me? Mary squeezed her hand. Someone must have, darling, but even if the past was painful, this little one inside you is proof you still have a future. Months passed. Victoria's pregnancy advanced, and the villagers came to know her as a quiet, graceful woman who sold handmade goods in the market and sang softly to her unborn child. She laughed with the children of the village, helped mend nets, and found comfort in the simple life. Yet deep inside, there was always a hollow ache, an emptiness she couldn't name. Meanwhile, in the glass towers of New York, Richard buried himself in work, but nothing erased the haunting image of Victoria's fall. Selina stayed close, feeding on his grief like a parasite. She whispered promises of comfort, assuring him she was all he had left. Slowly, Richard leaned on her, not out of love, but out of desperation. At charity galas, Selina clung to his arm as cameras flashed. To the public, she was the woman who supported the grieving billionaire. Behind closed doors, she whispered poison into his ear. "You need to move on, Richard. Victoria wouldn't want you drowning in the past. She's gone. I'm here." But no matter how much Selina tried to cement her place, Richard's eyes often drifted to the empty side of his bed at night. He clutched Victoria's wedding ring, staring at it in silence. Guilt gnawed at him, a guilt Selina could never erase. Back in the coastal village, life was about to change forever. On a stormy night, the waves crashed violently against the rocks as Victoria went into labor. Mary and Dr. Patel stayed by her side, guiding her through every painful moment. Hours passed until the cries of a newborn filled the small room. Victoria, drenched in sweat and tears, cradled her baby boy for the first time. His tiny fingers wrapped around hers, and something deep inside her heart stirred. A fierce, unbreakable love. "Lucas," she whispered. "Your name is Lucas." Mary smiled warmly. "He's strong, just like his mother." Though she still didn't know who she had been, Victoria knew one thing with certainty. Her purpose was clear now. She would live, fight, and protect her son, no matter what. And while Richard mourned a wife he thought was gone, Victoria was beginning the life that would one day bring her back to him. 3 years passed in the small coastal village, and with each season, Victoria's life transformed. Her memory had not returned, yet she built something new from the ashes of her forgotten past. She was no longer the fragile woman who had arrived broken and bloodied. Now she was a mother. Little Lucas toddled by her side, his laughter echoing through the cobblestone streets of the market. His bright eyes and mischievous grin reminded the villagers of sunlight after rain. He was strong, curious, and filled with boundless energy. To Victoria, he was her anchor. Each morning, she braided her hair, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and carried baskets of handmade bread and trinkets to the village square. She worked tirelessly, selling enough to care for herself and her son. At night, she told Lucas bedtime stories while rocking him to sleep, her voice steady with love. The boy would clutch her necklace, the silver pendant Mary had saved from the night of the fall, like it was a treasure. Yet even in moments of joy, shadows lingered. Sometimes when Lucas looked up at her, Victoria felt a tug of recognition, as if his eyes belonged to someone else she once knew. But the memory never fully returned. Meanwhile, across the city skyline of New York, Selina Gray's star continued to rise. She dressed in designer gowns, attended board meetings, and appeared in magazines as Richard Collins's support system. She played the role of a grieving companion perfectly, earning sympathy from the public and influence among investors. But behind closed doors, Selina's mask slipped. She had Richard wrapped around her finger, exploiting his grief to tighten her control. She whispered in his ear about business deals, convinced him to sign documents, and slowly inserted herself into the Collins empire. "Richard, you need to let me help you," she cooed one evening as she slid contracts across his desk. "You've been carrying too much since Victoria's passing. Let me take some of the burden." Richard, weary and hollow, nodded absent-mindedly. His heart still ached with the memory of his wife, but Selina's persistence left him too tired to resist. He signed papers without question, never realizing how much power he was surrendering. To the outside world, Richard appeared strong, moving forward with Selina at his side. But in truth, he was a man drowning in regret, haunted by the ghost of a woman he thought he had lost forever. And while Selina savored her growing empire, Victoria tucked Lucas into bed under the glow of a single lamp. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "I don't know who I used to be, but I know who I am now. I'm your mother, and that's enough." Lucas's little arms wrapped around her neck. "I love you, Mama," he murmured sleepily. Victoria smiled, her heart swelling with both love and an unshakable ache she couldn't name. Neither she nor Richard knew that the child she cradled was the missing piece of a truth that would soon shatter their worlds. Life in the village was far from easy. Though Victoria had found peace in raising Lucas, every day brought new challenges. Her small stall at the market earned little, barely enough for food and rent. Some nights she went to bed hungry just to make sure her son's plate was full. Still, she smiled through the exhaustion, never letting Lucas see her fear. The boy was 3 now, full of restless energy. He loved to run along the shoreline, chasing gulls and splashing in the waves. Victoria often called after him, her heart leaping whenever he stumbled. Protecting him became her only mission. "You are my whole world," she whispered as she hugged him after each scare. But not everyone in the village was kind. A group of local debt collectors had begun harassing merchants, demanding payments for protection. One afternoon, as Victoria arranged bread at her stall, 2 men approached, their shadows looming. "Pretty stall you've got here," one sneered. "Be a shame if something happened to it." Victoria stiffened, shielding Lucas behind her. "I don't have money for this. Please, just leave us alone." The man smirked. "Then maybe next time we'll take something else instead." His eyes flicked toward Lucas before he laughed and walked away. Fear gripped her chest, but she stood firm. She would not let anyone harm her child. That night, Mary urged her to stay cautious. "There's danger everywhere, my dear. But remember, strength isn't in what you've lost, it's in what you protect." Meanwhile, in New York, cracks were beginning to show in the perfect facade Selina had built. Richard sat at his desk late one night, staring at a stack of financial reports. Something didn't add up. Millions had been shifted from one account to another, hidden under the guise of new investments. When he questioned Selina, her response was too rehearsed. "Oh, Richard," she said with a soft laugh, brushing her manicured fingers along his arm. "You're too stressed to worry about details. Leave those to me. I've been handling everything perfectly." But Richard wasn't convinced. For the first time, suspicion crept into his heart. He remembered Victoria, her honesty, her quiet strength. She never hid things from him. Selina, however, seemed to have secrets she wasn't willing to share. That night, he sat alone in the dark, clutching Victoria's wedding ring in his hand. His chest tightened with grief, regret, and a new, unsettling question. Had he trusted the wrong woman? Back in the coastal village, Victoria knelt beside Lucas's bed, watching him sleep peacefully. His tiny hand clutched her necklace as if it were a shield. She stroked his hair, her heart swelling with love and fear all at once. "I'll protect you, Lucas," she whispered, "no matter what it takes." Neither she nor Richard knew that their separate battles, hers for survival, his against betrayal, were about to collide in ways neither could imagine. In the gleaming towers of New York, Richard Collins was no longer blind. For years, he had allowed Selina to handle his affairs, drowning in grief and regret, too weak to resist her presence. But the more he studied the financial records, the more he realized how deep her manipulation ran. Millions had disappeared, projects stalled, and board members whispered behind his back. One evening, Richard confronted her in his office. "Selina," he said firmly, "what are these transfers? Why is money moving to offshore accounts I never approved?" Selina's painted smile flickered. She leaned close, trying to soothe him with her charm. "Richard, you're under too much stress. These are routine transactions, trust me. You don't need to get lost in the numbers." But Richard's jaw tightened. For the first time, he pushed her hand away. "No, I want answers." Selina's eyes darkened, but she quickly disguised her irritation. She couldn't afford for him to see the truth, not yet. She laughed softly and kissed his cheek. "Of course, darling. I'll prepare a full report tomorrow. Tonight, let's not fight. You need rest." Richard nodded reluctantly, but the seed of doubt was planted. Deep down, he knew something was very wrong. Far from the glittering city, in the quiet coastal village, Victoria was facing battles of her own. The debt collectors had returned to the market, their threats louder, their presence more menacing. Victoria had tried to avoid them, but one afternoon they cornered her stall. Lucas clung to her skirt as she stood her ground. "You pay today," one of the men growled, or you don't sell here anymore." "I told you, I don't have money," Victoria said firmly, her voice trembling only slightly. "Leave us alone." The man's hand shot out, shoving her basket of bread to the ground. The loaves scattered across the dirt as Lucas cried out. Fury rose in Victoria's chest. She grabbed her son and held him close, her eyes blazing. "Touch us again," she snapped, "and you'll regret it." The men laughed, amused at her defiance, but they backed away for now. Still, the message was clear. Danger was circling her and Lucas. That night, as she sat by the fire, Mary spoke gently. "You can't live in fear, Victoria. You've survived the worst already. Whatever life took from you, it left you with strength. Use it." Victoria stared at the flames, her hand resting protectively over Lucas's head as he slept. She didn't remember her past, but she knew this. She would fight for her child with every breath she had. At the same time, in his empty penthouse, Richard poured a glass of whiskey but didn't drink it. He looked at Victoria's wedding ring in his palm, his reflection in the glass. Selena's face haunted him now, not with comfort, but with suspicion. He didn't know it yet, but his doubts about Selena and Victoria's fight for survival were paths destined to collide, and nothing would ever be the same. Daniel Harris had always trusted his instincts. As one of the most respected attorneys in New York, he had seen his share of betrayals, but nothing unsettled him more than the death of Victoria Collins. She had been his friend in college, a woman of grace and quiet strength. Her fall had never sat right with him, and now, with rumors swirling around Selena Gray, his suspicions only deepened. Late one evening, Daniel sat in his office surrounded by stacks of financial documents. He had managed to get his hands on the company's quarterly reports. What he found was alarming. Millions missing, shell companies popping up in offshore havens, all signed off by Selena with Richard's distracted approval. "This isn't just sloppy accounting," Daniel muttered to himself. "This is theft." He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He thought of Richard, grieving and blind, trapped in Selena's web. If only Victoria were alive, she would have seen through the lies. But then, something odd caught his eye. A line item buried deep in an expense report. A payment to a coastal clinic far outside the city. It was small compared to the other numbers, but curious. Why would the Collins estate be linked to such a place? Daniel's brow furrowed. He made a note to investigate. Meanwhile, Selena was growing bolder. She paraded on Richard's arm at social events, smiling for cameras, playing the role of the grieving companion turned loyal partner. Yet behind the scenes, she grew nervous. Daniel's reputation made her uneasy. She knew he was digging, and she had to silence him before he found something she couldn't bury. At one board meeting, Daniel confronted her directly. "Selena, can you explain the offshore transfers? These numbers don't add up." Her smile was ice. "Daniel, I think you're overstepping. Richard trusts me. Perhaps you should focus on your own clients." Richard shifted uncomfortably, the tension heavy in the room. For the first time, he looked at Selena, not with blind faith, but with unease. Miles away, Victoria tucked Lucas into bed. He was 3 now, curious and bright, his little voice asking endless questions. "Mama, where's my papa?" he asked one night, his innocent eyes searching hers. Victoria froze. She had no answer. The memory of Richard's face lingered in flashes she didn't understand, brown eyes filled with sorrow, a wedding ring that glinted under light, but the past remained just out of reach. Lucas touched her cheek. "Don't be sad, Mama. You have me." Tears welled in her eyes as she hugged him tightly. "Yes, baby, I have you." Back in the city, Daniel closed his laptop, staring at the note he had written. Coastal Clinic, Bayview District. Something told him the answer he'd been searching for lay there. And if his instincts were right, the truth would shake Richard Collins's world to its core, because the wife he thought was dead might still be breathing. The next morning, Daniel drove out of the city, leaving behind glass towers and traffic jams for winding roads that led toward the coast. His instincts had never failed him, and the line item in the Collins financial records gnawed at his mind. Why would a billionaire's accounts be tied to a tiny clinic in a fishing village hours away? He parked near a weathered sign that read Bayview Community Clinic. The building was humble. Peeling paint, narrow windows, and the smell of salt water drifting in from the harbor. Inside, he met Dr. Patel, a man in his 50s with tired eyes but steady hands. I'm looking into some financial irregularities linked to your clinic, Daniel explained smoothly. I just need to know if you've had any unusual cases in the last 3 years. Dr. Patel's expression tightened, guarded. We serve many patients, Mr. Harris. Most are fishermen, villagers, people who can't afford the city hospitals. Daniel leaned in. I'm not asking for names. Just, have you ever treated someone who came in badly injured, maybe from a fall? The doctor hesitated. His eyes flicked toward a file cabinet before he caught himself. People get hurt all the time. The cliffs near here are dangerous. Accidents happen. Daniel thanked him politely, but as he left, he noted the tension in Patel's voice. His gut told him there was something the doctor wasn't saying. Meanwhile, in the small cottage by the sea, Victoria was tidying up while Lucas played with seashells on the floor. She paused suddenly, her hands trembling as a flash struck her mind. A grand ballroom, chandeliers glittering, and the echo of applause. Her heart raced. Mama? Lucas looked up. Victoria clutched her head, closing her eyes. The image dissolved into fragments. A man's voice shouting her name, the sound of glass shattering, the feel of strong arms around her. For a moment, she could almost see his face. Then it was gone, leaving only confusion. She sank into a chair, whispering, "Who was he? Why do I feel like someone is missing from me?" Mary entered with a basket of laundry and noticed her distress. "Another memory?" she asked gently. Victoria nodded. "It's like a dream. I see flashes, but nothing clear. It's as if someone is calling me back, but I don't know who." Mary knelt beside her. "Don't force it. The truth will come when you're ready. Until then, hold on to what you have now. Your boy, your life here. That's real." Victoria smiled faintly, brushing Lucas's hair. Yet, her heart knew Mary was wrong. The visions weren't just dreams. They were pieces of a life she had lost, a life she still longed for without even knowing why. Back outside the clinic, Daniel lingered by his car, staring at the ocean waves crashing against the cliffs. His instincts whispered that the answers he sought lay not in numbers, but in people. And perhaps, just beyond his reach, was the biggest secret of all. If he kept digging, he might uncover the truth Richard had buried under grief. The wife who was supposed to be dead was still alive. The morning sun spilled through the small cottage window, casting light across Victoria's face. She sat by the table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. Lucas played nearby with wooden blocks, humming to himself. But Victoria's mind was far away. For nights, she had been plagued by flashes, images that came without warning, a silver gown brushing across marble floors, a man's deep voice calling her name, a velvet box cradled in her hand. And then the fall. Darkness, fear, and blood. She jolted, spilling her tea as the vision struck again. Lucas rushed to her side. "Mama, what's wrong?" Victoria pressed her fingers to her temples, her voice shaking. "It's happening again, baby. I see things I don't understand." Mary entered, concern etched across her face. "What did you see this time?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "A man. He was crying. He held me, begged me not to leave him. I don't know who he is, but when I see his face, my heart aches. Why do I feel like I've forgotten someone I love?" Mary touched her shoulder gently. "Maybe it's your mind trying to heal. Memories have a way of returning when the heart is strong enough." Victoria looked down at Lucas, brushing his hair with trembling fingers. "All I know is, whoever I was before, I was loved, and I can't let those memories stay buried forever." Miles away, Daniel Harris sat in his office, staring at a thin folder he had managed to obtain. He had returned to the Bayview Clinic under the pretense of reviewing charitable funding, and while Dr. Patel remained guarded, Daniel's persistence had paid off. A clerk had quietly slipped him an anonymous file. Inside was a single hospital intake record dated 3 years ago. No name was listed, only the words female, late 20s, severe head trauma from fall. Pregnant, condition critical. Daniel's pulse quickened. He knew immediately who it described. Victoria. He whispered, his throat tight. The record went on to mention that both mother and child had survived. Daniel closed his eyes, fighting back disbelief. After all these years, after signing a death certificate, Richard's wife hadn't died. She had been hidden, alive, raising a child. But why hadn't anyone told Richard? Why had the clinic concealed it? Daniel's instincts screamed that someone had ensured Victoria's disappearance stayed a secret. That night, Daniel sat at his desk, flipping between the file and his memories of her. He remembered her laughter in college, her kindness, her unwavering loyalty to Richard, even when others doubted him. The thought of her alone, forgotten, raising a child without anyone's help, filled him with rage. He knew Richard deserved to know the truth, but timing was everything. If Selina sensed what he was uncovering, she would bury the evidence, and maybe Victoria, forever. Meanwhile, in the cottage, Victoria sat at the edge of Lucas's bed, humming a lullaby. Her heart pounded with the weight of memories pressing to return. And as Daniel prepared to reveal the truth, fate was moving fast, pushing Victoria and Richard closer to the day their worlds would collide again. Daniel sat in his apartment with the files spread out before him, the evidence clear as day. Victoria Collins had not died. She had survived the fall, delivered a child, and lived in hiding all these years. Every instinct in him screamed to march into Richard's office and tell him everything. But hesitation gnawed at him. Richard had been drowning in guilt and grief for 3 years. If Daniel revealed the truth too soon, without proof that Victoria was ready to face the past, it could destroy them both. And then there was Selina. If she caught wind of what Daniel knew, she would crush the truth before it ever reached the surface. He poured a glass of water, staring out at the New York skyline. "What do I do?" he muttered to himself. His phone buzzed, a message from Helen, Victoria's old friend. "I still can't believe she's gone. Something about it never felt right." Daniel tightened his grip on the phone. He couldn't carry this secret alone for long. But timing, he reminded himself, was everything. Meanwhile, far from the city, Victoria was trapped in a battle inside her own mind. That night, after putting Lucas to bed, she sat by the window overlooking the sea. The waves crashed violently against the rocks, the same sound that had haunted her dreams for years. Her head pounded, her chest heaved, and suddenly the memories came harder, faster, sharper. She was back at the gala. The chandeliers glittered overhead. Music swirled. She stood in a silver gown, clutching a velvet box. Then the face appeared, Richard. For the first time, clear and undeniable, she saw him. His deep brown eyes filled with sorrow and love. His voice broke through the fog, shouting her name, "Victoria!" She felt his arms around her, warm and desperate, just before the darkness swallowed her. Victoria gasped, clutching her chest as tears streamed down her face. The name rolled off her tongue, trembling but certain. "Richard!" Mary rushed into the room. "What is it, child?" Victoria's body shook. "I saw him. A man. He was holding me, crying for me." "His name?" "Richard. I know it." Mary's eyes widened. She had always suspected the young woman had a life beyond the village, but hearing a name, hearing this breakthrough, confirmed it. "Then maybe you're closer to the truth than you think," she said softly. Victoria pressed her palms to her face, overwhelmed. "If he loved me, why am I here? Why was I left behind?" Mary stroked her hair gently. Perhaps it wasn't his choice. That night, Victoria lay awake, staring at Lucas's sleeping face. The child's features tugged at her heart. Now that she remembered Richard, questions clawed at her mind. Was he alive? Did he know about Lucas? Did he still love her, or had he betrayed her? And as her memories returned piece by piece, the storm that would reunite and shatter 2 lives was beginning to form. The sea was calm that morning, but Victoria's heart raced like a storm. For 3 years she had lived in the coastal village, raising Lucas in safety and silence. But now, with Richard's face clear in her memory, the walls around her fragile world were cracking. She stood by the window, watching her son chase gulls along the shoreline. Lucas's laughter filled the air, but Victoria's mind was heavy with questions. Who was Richard truly? Did he know she was alive? And if he did, why had he never come for her? Mary noticed the change in her. "You've been restless, child," she said gently as she folded linens. "Your mind is no longer here. You're somewhere else." Victoria sighed, her voice trembling. "I can't stay hidden forever, Mary. I saw his face. I heard his voice. I know his name, Richard. If he's out there, I need to know why my life was torn apart, and Lucas deserves answers too." Mary placed a hand on her shoulder. "If you leave, nothing will ever be the same. Are you ready for that?" Victoria looked at Lucas again, his small hands tossing shells into the tide. Her heart clenched. "I don't know if I'm ready, but I know I can't keep living like this. Half a life, half a truth. I need to find him." That night, as Lucas slept peacefully, Victoria packed a small bag. clothes, the silver pendant that Mary had saved, and the velvet box she had hidden for years with the sonogram and letters still inside. She kissed Mary's cheek with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for saving me, but now I have to save myself." Meanwhile, in New York, Daniel Harris was preparing for his own battle. For weeks he had pieced together evidence, financial records, shell accounts, falsified signatures. Selina Gray had not only manipulated Richard emotionally, but she had siphoned millions from the Collins empire. Daniel's anger simmered. Richard had been blind, drowning in grief, but Daniel knew the truth had to be revealed before Selina destroyed everything. He rehearsed his words in the mirror late at night. "Richard, your wife didn't die. She was hidden. And while you mourned, Selina took advantage of you." His reflection stared back at him, skeptical, haunted. Would Richard believe him? Or would Selina poison his mind before the truth could take root? At a board meeting the next morning, Daniel arrived with a folder thick with documents. Richard sat at the head of the table, looking older than his years, his eyes weary. Selina sat beside him, dressed in white like an angel, her smile practiced and perfect. As the meeting began, Daniel's hands tightened around the folder. He knew the time was near. He would not only confront Selina's corruption, he would begin to open Richard's eyes to a truth even more shocking. Back in Bayview, Victoria held Lucas's tiny hand as they boarded a bus bound for the city. Her chest pounded with fear and hope. Neither she nor Daniel knew that their decisions, made miles apart, were about to collide, and Richard Collins's life would never be the same again. The bus rumbled into the city, its windows reflecting the steel and glass of New York's skyline. Victoria held Lucas close, her heart pounding as memories flickered in her mind. For 3 years, she had lived in quiet exile, but now every turn of the wheels brought her closer to the truth she had buried. Lucas leaned against her shoulder, his small voice full of wonder. "Mama, are we going to find Papa?" The word froze her. She had not told him much, only that somewhere in the world a father existed. Now, staring out at the skyscrapers piercing the sky, she whispered, "Yes, baby, we're going to find him." At that same moment, inside the towering Collins headquarters, a storm was brewing. Richard sat at the head of the long mahogany table, the weight of his empire pressing down on his shoulders. Selina, poised beside him, whispered softly in his ear as board members shuffled papers. But her calm was broken when Daniel Harris entered the room, a thick folder clutched in his hand. "Richard," Daniel said firmly, his voice carrying authority, "we need to talk." Selina's smile faltered. "This is a board meeting, Daniel. If you have concerns, schedule an appointment like everyone else." But Daniel's gaze never left Richard. He laid the folder on the table and slid it forward. "These are records of offshore accounts tied directly to you, but the signatures aren't yours. They're forged. Millions have been siphoned off over the last 3 years, all authorized under Selina's oversight." The room fell silent. Richard's hands clenched around the papers as he scanned them, his face drained of color. "Is this true?" he demanded, his voice low, trembling with fury. Selina laughed nervously, leaning close to him. "Darling, this is nonsense. He's twisting numbers to make me look guilty. You know I'd never betray you." Daniel slammed his hand against the table. "Enough lies. She's been playing you since the night of the accident. Richard, open your eyes. While you mourned your wife, she was stealing from you." The board erupted in whispers. Richard stared at Selina, his trust crumbling. He thought of her excuses, her reassurances, the way she had always silenced his doubts. For the first time, he saw her mask for what it was. "Get out," Richard said coldly. Selina's eyes widened. "Richard, get out of this room," he repeated, his voice like ice. As guards moved forward, Selina's perfect composure shattered. Her glare at Daniel was sharp enough to kill. But she rose, her heels clicking furiously against the marble floor as she stormed out. Richard slumped back in his chair, the folder heavy in his hands. He looked up at Daniel, pain etched across his face. "If she betrayed me, then what else have I been blind to?" Daniel hesitated, his next words burning on his tongue. He wasn't ready to reveal everything, not yet. But soon, Richard would have to face the truth that went beyond money. And just outside the towering skyscraper, Victoria and Lucas stepped off the bus, the past and present about to collide. The wife he thought was dead was walking back into his city, with his child at her side. Victoria stepped off the bus, her heart pounding as she looked up at the skyline. The city felt both familiar and foreign, like a dream she couldn't quite grasp. Lucas clung to her hand, his wide eyes darting between the endless buildings and the rush of people. "Mama," he whispered, tugging on her sleeve, "is this where Papa is?" Victoria knelt down, brushing his hair back gently. "Yes, baby, somewhere here. But we have to be careful." She didn't know what she would find, or who Richard had become in the years since she had disappeared. But the memories of his face, his voice, and the desperate way he had held her at the cliff came back in flashes, urging her forward. Meanwhile, in the towering Collins headquarters, Richard sat alone in his office. The confrontation with Daniel replayed in his mind, every word burning like fire. Selena's betrayal was undeniable. He felt sick, furious at himself for being blind for so long. He stared at a photograph on his desk, his wedding picture with Victoria. Her smile was radiant, her eyes full of life. He ran his thumb across the glass, whispering, "If only you were still here, I'd give anything for another chance." At that same moment, fate was weaving their paths closer together. Victoria and Lucas wandered through the streets, eventually finding a small cafe to rest. As they sat by the window, Victoria froze. A magazine on the counter bore Richard's face on the cover, standing next to Selena. The headline read, "Billionaire Collins betrayed by Mistress." Her chest tightened. She traced his image with trembling fingers. "That's him," she whispered. Lucas leaned over. "Papa?" Victoria nodded slowly, her throat tight. "Yes, Lucas, that's your father." Tears welled in her eyes as memories surged, the gala, the velvet box, the fall. Everything pointed to one truth. She had to see him. But fear gnawed at her. What if he had moved on? What if he no longer wanted her, or their son? Across town, Daniel entered Richard's office once again, this time more determined than ever. "Richard," he said firmly, "Selena isn't your biggest problem. You've been living in a lie far deeper than money or betrayal." Richard looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Daniel hesitated, then chose his words carefully. "I need you to prepare yourself. Because something is about to come back into your life, something you thought you lost forever." Richard frowned, confusion darkening his features. But before Daniel could explain, his phone buzzed. A message from an informant at the Bayview clinic. She left the village. She's in the city now. Daniel's heart pounded. The timing was no coincidence. Victoria was here. That evening, as Richard stared out his office window, a strange unease washed over him. He didn't know why, but he felt her. It was as if the air itself whispered her name. And just blocks away, Victoria stood on the same street, clutching Lucas's hand, steps away from colliding with the man who still believed she was dead. The city streets glowed under the evening lights, but for Victoria, every step felt like walking into destiny. She held Lucas's hand tightly as they approached the towering Collins headquarters. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared he could hear it. Lucas looked up at the glittering glass building. "Mama, is Papa in there?" Victoria swallowed hard, kneeling beside him. "Yes, baby, we're going to see him. But remember, you must stay close to me." Her legs trembled as she walked into the lobby. The receptionist glanced up, offering a polite smile that froze when her eyes landed on Victoria. For a moment, she looked like she'd seen a ghost. "Ma'am, do you have an appointment?" the woman stammered. Victoria's voice was steady, though her heart was breaking. "Tell Richard Collins that his wife is here to see him." The receptionist's hand shook as she picked up the phone. Within minutes, word reached Richard's office. He was standing at the window, lost in thought, when his assistant entered. "Sir," she said cautiously, "there's someone downstairs asking for you. She claims to be your wife." Richard's glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. His chest heaved, his pulse racing. "What did you say?" The assistant hesitated. "She says she's Victoria." Richard didn't wait for another word. He bolted from his office, his footsteps echoing through the hall. His heart screamed it was impossible. He had buried her, mourned her, suffered for 3 long years. Yet something inside him knew it was true. In the lobby, Victoria stood frozen, Lucas at her side. The elevator doors opened with a sharp chime. Richard stepped out, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. The world stopped. "Victoria," his voice cracked, barely a whisper. Her eyes filled with tears as she whispered back, "Richard." For a long moment, neither moved. Then Richard stumbled forward, his hands shaking as if he feared she would vanish if he touched her. "It's you. It's really you." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she nodded. "I survived, Richard. I'm alive. And this?" She guided Lucas forward, her hand trembling. "This is your son." Lucas stared up at the man with wide eyes, clutching his mother's hand. "Papa?" he asked softly. Richard's knees buckled. He dropped down, eye level with the boy, tears flooding his eyes. "My God, my son." His voice broke as he reached out, with trembling hands, touching Lucas's face gently. "I thought I lost you both forever." Victoria's body shook with sobs. "I wanted to tell you. I tried, but I couldn't. Everything was taken from me." Richard pulled them both into his arms, clutching them desperately as if afraid the world would rip them away again. "Never again," he whispered fiercely. "I'll never let you go again." But watching from a shadowed corner of the lobby, Selina's eyes burned with rage, because the woman she thought she had erased had just returned, stronger than ever. The night after the reunion was heavy with unspoken words. Richard had brought Victoria and Lucas to his penthouse, a place that once echoed with loneliness but now trembled with the weight of history. Victoria sat by the window, gazing at the city lights. Lucas slept peacefully in the next room, unaware of the storm between his parents. Richard stood behind her, his hands clenched as he searched for the right words. "Victoria," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I thought you were gone. I buried you in my heart. If I had known, if I had even suspected you were alive, I would have searched every corner of this earth." Her eyes glistened with tears, but her voice was sharp. "But you didn't. You let them tell you I was dead. You signed papers. You moved on with her." Richard flinched. He had prepared for this anger, but hearing it tore him apart. He sank to his knees before her, desperation in his eyes. "I was blind, broken. Selina poisoned my mind when I was weakest. But nothing compares to what I feel for you. Please, Victoria, give me a chance to make this right." She turned away, her chest rising with pain. "For 3 years, I raised our son alone. I fought hunger, fear, and nightmares you'll never understand. And while I suffered, you gave my place to her." Richard's voice cracked. "I didn't give her your place. She forced her way in. I never stopped loving you, not for a single day." The words hung in the air, fragile yet burning. Victoria wanted to believe him, but the wound of betrayal was still raw. She closed her eyes, whispering, "Love isn't just words, Richard, it's action. And when I needed you most, you weren't there." He bowed his head, tears falling freely. "Then let me prove it now. Let me be the man I should have been. For you, for Lucas." From the shadows outside, another pair of eyes watched through the glass. Selina stood in the alley, her rage boiling as she saw Richard kneeling before Victoria. The sight of them together, whole, reunited, was unbearable. She dug her nails into her palm until blood pricked her skin. "They think they've won," she hissed to herself, "but I'm not finished. Not yet." Inside, Victoria finally spoke again. Her voice was softer, though still laced with pain. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Richard. Not yet. But for Lucas's sake, I'll stay. He deserves a father." Richard's heart surged with hope. He reached for her hand, but she pulled it back gently. "Don't mistake this for forgiveness. You'll have to earn that." Richard nodded solemnly. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life earning it." Victoria turned back toward the window, her eyes fixed on the skyline. Deep inside, she longed to believe him. But trust once broken was not easily mended. And while she wrestled with her heart, Selina began to craft a plan that would strike at the very core of their fragile reunion. The morning after Victoria's return, the city awoke to a storm. News outlets buzzed with headlines that spread like wildfire. "Miracle or manipulation? Billionaire's dead wife returns after 3 years." The story dominated every channel. Photos of Victoria entering the Collins building with Lucas were plastered across screens. Social media exploded with speculation. Some called it fate, a miracle of love restored. Others sneered, questioning her motives. And behind the headlines was Selina. Sitting in her luxurious penthouse, she sipped champagne as her phone lit up with calls from reporters she had carefully cultivated. Every word she fed them was poison disguised as truth. "She abandoned Richard when he needed her most," Selina said sweetly during one interview. "Now she suddenly appears with a child no one knew existed. Doesn't that seem suspicious?" Within hours, talk shows debated the scandal. Was Victoria really a victim, or was she manipulating the story for money and sympathy? At the Collins penthouse, Victoria watched the coverage with trembling hands. Her face, her son's face, splashed across every screen. The words fraud, liar, opportunist cut deep. Lucas sat beside her, confused by the flashing images of his mother. "Mama, why are they saying bad things about you?" he asked softly. Victoria pulled him close, her heart breaking. "Because sometimes people lie, Lucas, but we know the truth." Richard stormed into the room, his expression furious. He grabbed the remote and shut off the television. "This is Selena's doing. She's trying to destroy you because she knows the truth is slipping away from her." Victoria looked at him, her eyes filled with both pain and doubt. "And people believe her, Richard. What if Lucas grows up hearing lies about me?" Richard knelt in front of her, his hands gripping hers tightly. "Then we fight back. Together. I let her control me once. I won't let her hurt you or our son again." Meanwhile, Daniel was already moving behind the scenes. He had gathered documents, bank transfers, and even emails that tied Selena to years of corruption. He knew she was cornered, which made her more dangerous. But Selena was not finished. That evening, she appeared on live television, her face tear-streaked, her voice trembling with rehearsed sorrow. "I loved Richard through his grief," she told the cameras. "I supported him when no one else did. And now suddenly this woman comes back, claiming she's his wife? Where has she been all this time? Why hide? What mother hides a child from his father?" The performance was flawless. The audience watching couldn't see the venom behind her tears. Back at the penthouse, Victoria stood frozen as the broadcast played. Each word twisted the knife deeper. "She's turning the world against me," Victoria whispered, her hands shaking. Richard's jaw tightened, his eyes burning with rage. Then it's time the world saw who Selena really is. Because soon, Daniel would reveal the evidence that could shatter her carefully built lies once and for all. The city buzzed with controversy, but Daniel Harris knew the time for whispers was over. Selena had painted Victoria as a liar, a manipulator, a woman who abandoned her family. And though public opinion was divided, Daniel had what no one else did, the truth. On the day of the Collins Foundation charity gala, the ballroom glistened with chandeliers, reporters crowded outside, and cameras lined the walls. It was the perfect stage. Richard stood at the podium, his voice steady but hollow, preparing to make a speech. Beside him, Victoria held Lucas's hand, her head high despite the hostile stares. Then Daniel stepped forward. "Before we continue," he announced, his voice cutting through the room, "there is something the public deserves to know." Selena, draped in a crimson gown at the edge of the stage, stiffened. Her smile faltered. Daniel placed a thick file on the podium. For 3 years, while Richard mourned his wife, Selena Gray was draining millions from Collins Enterprises, offshore accounts, forged signatures, fake charities, and I have proof. Gasps rippled through the audience. Reporters leaned forward, their cameras flashing wildly. Selena laughed, her voice sharp and brittle. "This is absurd, lies spun by a jealous man who wants to discredit me." But Daniel remained calm. He clicked a remote, and the large screen behind him lit up. Emails appeared. Messages from Selena to her accomplices, instructing them to divert funds to make sure Richard never sees the numbers. The room erupted. Board members turned to one another in shock. Daniel continued, his voice relentless. "These are not rumors. These are facts. Selena Gray orchestrated fraud under the guise of loyalty. She profited while Richard bled with grief. And worse." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "She was the last person seen with Victoria the night of the so-called accident." Selena's mask slipped. Her eyes flashed with fury as the crowd roared with whispers. "You don't know what you're talking about," she spat. Daniel took a step closer. "Don't I? Because the surveillance footage from that night, the one you thought was erased, was recovered." He gestured to the screen again. The blurry video played, showing Selena and Victoria at the balcony. The shove was faint but undeniable. The room went silent, then chaos exploded. Reporters shouted, cameras zoomed in, board members muttered in outrage. Richard froze, his blood boiling as he watched the clip. His knees nearly gave out as the truth hit him. Selena hadn't just betrayed his trust. She had tried to murder his wife. Victoria clutched Lucas tightly, her tears falling freely. For years she had carried the wound of that night alone. Now the world finally saw it. Selina's voice cracked, her composure gone. She was in my way. I did what I had to do. The confession slipped before she could stop it, echoing like a death knell in the grand hall. Police officers, already present for security, moved forward. The handcuffs clicked around her wrists as she screamed, "You'll regret this, all of you." Richard turned toward Victoria, his eyes filled with anguish and relief. Selina's empire of lies had crumbled, and for the first time, the path to healing was clear. The echoes of Selina's screams still lingered in the ballroom long after the police had dragged her away in handcuffs. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved forward, and reporters shouted questions into the chaos. But for Richard, the world around him had gone silent. His eyes were fixed on one person only, Victoria. She stood near the stage, holding Lucas protectively in her arms. Her silver necklace caught the light, the same necklace she had worn the night she fell. Tears streaked her cheeks, but her back was straight, her chin lifted. For years, she had carried the weight of silence. Now the truth was out for all to see. Richard stepped toward her slowly, as if afraid she would vanish if he moved too fast. "Victoria," he whispered, his voice raw. "It's over. She can't hurt you anymore." Victoria's gaze flicked to him, her eyes filled with pain. "It's not over, Richard, not for me. Do you know what it's like to wake up alone, bleeding, with no memory of who you are? To raise a child in fear, wondering if the world will ever know your truth? You mourned me, but I lived that nightmare." Richard's chest tightened. He reached for her, but she stepped back. "I failed you," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I should have fought harder to uncover the truth. I should never have let her into our lives. I don't deserve your forgiveness." Lucas tugged at Victoria's sleeve, looking between them with wide eyes. "Mama, is Papa bad?" he asked innocently. Her heart broke at the question. She knelt, brushing his hair gently. "No, baby, Papa made mistakes, but he loves you. He loves us." Richard dropped to his knees, his hands trembling as he touched Lucas's cheek. "I swear to you, son, I will never fail you again. I will protect you and your mother with everything I am." For the first time, Victoria saw not the billionaire, not the man corrupted by power and blinded by betrayal, but a broken husband and father begging for another chance. Still, the wounds inside her ran deep. She folded her arms, steadying her voice. "Love isn't enough, Richard. Trust has to be rebuilt, and that won't happen overnight." He nodded, tears streaking his face. "Then I'll wait as long as it takes. Just don't leave. Please, Victoria, stay. Give me the chance to make it right." The crowd around them began to disperse, the reporters chasing after the police escorting Selina. But those who remained watched in silence as the billionaire knelt before his wife and son, stripped of pride, begging not for power, but for family. Victoria turned to the window, staring at the city lights beyond the glass. Her heart ached with conflicting emotions, anger, grief, love, and hope. She couldn't forget the pain, but she couldn't deny the bond either. And as Richard held her gaze, the question hung heavy in the air. Could a broken family truly find its way back together? The days after Selina's arrest were filled with headlines, investigations, and endless noise from the media. But inside the Collins penthouse, life had shifted to something quieter, almost fragile. Richard no longer rushed to meetings or drowned himself in contracts. Instead, he was learning how to be a husband again, and for the first time, a father. One morning, Victoria woke to the sound of laughter in the living room. She slipped out of bed, her robe wrapped tight, and peeked around the corner. There was Richard, on the floor in his suit pants and rolled-up sleeves, building a tower of blocks with Lucas. Each time the boy knocked it down, Richard laughed, clapping his hands with a joy she had never seen in him before. "Again, Papa. Again." Lucas squealed. "Of course, champ," Richard said, his voice soft and full of warmth. "As many times as you want." Victoria's chest tightened at the sight. For 3 years, Lucas had grown without a father, and now the man she once thought lost to her was trying. Really trying. Later that afternoon, Richard appeared in the kitchen, an apron comically tied over his shirt. "I thought I'd cook dinner tonight," he said sheepishly, holding a cookbook upside down. Victoria raised an eyebrow. "You cook?" He grinned, scratching his neck. "I may own half the city, but I can't figure out how to boil pasta. But I'll learn. For you, for him." The food ended up burnt, the smoke alarm blaring, but Victoria couldn't help laughing, a sound she hadn't allowed herself in years. Richard looked at her, his eyes shining with gratitude at the simple gift of her laughter. At night, when Lucas was asleep, Richard approached her cautiously. "I know words mean nothing without action. So I'm showing you, Victoria. I'll be here every morning when you wake, every night when you sleep. I'll put Lucas to bed, take him to school, make him pancakes on Saturdays, whatever it takes. I don't want to be the man I was. I want to be the man you both deserve." Victoria's heart warred with itself. She remembered the betrayal, the nights of loneliness, the image of him standing beside Selena. But she also remembered the man who once held her hand through every trial, the man who wept over her body when he thought she was gone. She looked at him carefully. "Actions take time, Richard. It's not about one dinner or one day with Lucas. It's about every day, every choice. If you want me to believe you've changed, prove it, over and over again." Richard nodded, his voice steady. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life proving it." Victoria turned away, her eyes moist with unspoken emotion. She wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. But for the first time, she felt the wall around her heart begin to crack. And as Richard tucked Lucas into bed that night, whispering a promise of love, Victoria realized she might be witnessing the start of a redemption she never thought possible. The city had quieted after the storm of Selena's downfall, but inside the Collins penthouse, silence carried a different weight. Days had passed since the gala, since the arrest, since Richard's vow to change. He had kept his word, present for every meal, every bedtime story, every small moment with Lucas. But between him and Victoria, an invisible wall still stood. One evening, Victoria found herself standing on the balcony, staring out at the glittering city, the same kind of balcony where her nightmare had begun 3 years ago. Her hands trembled as the memory replayed, the shove, the fall, the scream swallowed by darkness. Richard appeared behind her, his steps hesitant. "Victoria," he said softly, "I know that look. You're back there, aren't you, on that night?" She closed her eyes, her breath uneven. "I can't escape it, Richard. I hear the music, the laughter, and then her hands pushing me into nothing. Every night when I close my eyes, I fall again, and when I wake up, you're there. But so is she. Always her." Richard's face crumpled with grief. He moved closer but didn't touch her, afraid to push too far. "If I could take back every choice, every blindness, I would. I let her into our lives. I let her poison me, and because of that, you suffered more than anyone ever should." His voice cracked. "It's my fault." Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks as she turned to him. "Do you know what hurt the most? It wasn't the fall. It wasn't the blood. It was waking up alone, thinking you had given up on me, thinking I wasn't worth fighting for." Richard dropped to his knees before her, his voice breaking. "You were worth everything. You still are. I didn't give up, Victoria. I was blind, and I let grief destroy me, but I never stopped loving you. Please believe that." Her sobs shook her body, years of buried pain rushing to the surface. Richard reached up, his hands trembling as he gently cupped hers. For a moment she pulled back, but then, slowly she let him hold her. Lucas's sleepy voice drifted from the doorway. "Mama? Papa? Why are you crying?" Victoria turned, wiping her tears quickly. "We're okay, baby. Mama and Papa are just talking." Richard extended his hand to Lucas, pulling him close. The three of them stood together, the city lights glowing behind them. Victoria looked into Richard's eyes, eyes once clouded by betrayal, but now filled with raw, desperate truth. She felt the walls around her heart tremble. "I can't erase what happened," she whispered, "and I don't know if I'll ever forget. But for Lucas, and for us, I'm willing to try, one step at a time." Richard's breath caught, his eyes flooding with relief. "That's all I ask. One step, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that you chose right by coming back." For the first time in years, Victoria felt a spark of peace. The wound wasn't healed, but it was beginning to close. And as she leaned into Richard's embrace, the family that once shattered began to mend under the promise of a new tomorrow. Weeks passed, and the storm that had nearly destroyed the Collins family finally began to settle. Selena Gray sat behind bars, her once dazzling beauty replaced by bitterness and fury. The trial was swift and merciless. With Daniel's evidence and her own public confession, the court found her guilty of fraud, attempted murder, and conspiracy. The verdict was read aloud. "Selena Gray, you are sentenced to 30 years in federal prison." The courtroom buzzed with gasps, but Selena's glare never wavered. Her eyes searched for Richard and Victoria, who sat together in the front row. Lucas sat between them, swinging his legs innocently, unaware of the full gravity of the moment. "You'll regret this," Selina screamed as guards pulled her away. "He'll never forgive you. You'll never be whole again." Victoria tightened her grip on Richard's hand, her eyes steady. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of Selina. "No, Selina," she whispered, her voice calm. "You've already lost. We're free of you now." When the gavel struck, it felt like the closing of a dark chapter. That evening, back at the Collins penthouse, Richard sat with Victoria on the balcony. The same place that once symbolized betrayal now held the glow of a new beginning. Lucas ran around the living room behind them, giggling as he played with toy cars. Richard turned to her, his voice quiet but full of conviction. "Victoria, I know I can never erase the pain I caused, but I promise you, every day from this moment forward will be about us, about building something stronger, something honest." Victoria studied him, her heart softening. The man who once lost himself to pride and blindness now sat before her, stripped of ego, filled only with love. She placed her hand over his. "Then let's stop looking back. For Lucas, for us, let's choose tomorrow." Richard's eyes filled with tears as he pulled her close. For the first time in years, the embrace wasn't haunted by guilt or shadows. It was pure, real, and whole. Lucas patted over, climbing onto their laps. "Mama, Papa," he said sleepily, "can we always stay like this?" Victoria kissed his forehead, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes, baby, always." Richard wrapped his arms around them both, whispering, "This is forever." The city lights twinkled below, but inside the Collins home, a brighter light burned, the kind that comes only after surviving the darkest storm. Daniel visited later that week, smiling as he watched the family together. "I told you the truth would set you free," he teased gently. Victoria clasped his hand. "Thank you, Daniel, for never giving up." Richard added, his voice steady, "You saved not just my company, but my family." Daniel smiled, but his eyes softened as he looked at Victoria and Lucas. "No, you saved yourselves. All I did was clear the path." The three shared a moment of quiet gratitude, knowing the war was over. Victoria leaned her head against Richard's shoulder, Lucas asleep in her arms. Her scars would always remain, but they no longer defined her. For the first time in years, the Collins family was whole again, stronger, unbroken, and ready to face the future together. So, my dear friends, our story has come to an end, and if you are still here with us until this very moment, it means something inside this journey has touched your heart. Life teaches us, just as Victoria's story did, that no matter how deep the pain, healing is possible. The Stoics often said, "We cannot control what happens to us, only how we respond." Victoria could not control betrayal or loss, but she chose love, resilience, and forgiveness. And maybe that's a reminder for us all, that scars don't make us broken, they make us stronger. If you feel this story has spoken to you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to our channel. Because together, we can keep telling stories that remind us of the strength of the human heart.